Marion Coy here today from Ireland, and we are in the little conference, and we are trying to search the soul of Europe. So I wanted to ask you. Yesterday evening, you talked about the necessity to remember history and what has been. In recent years, I would say that Europe has been emphasized as an economical union, but there certainly is something more than only economy and wealth creation. Just wanted to hear your thoughts about what you said last night, and why is it important to know your history?
Well, I think we should remember when people talk about the economy that the generation of a good economy is not an end in itself. Because what do you want the wealth for? You want the wealth to achieve other aims, which are generally social and cultural. And how do we define our social and cultural aims? They are shaped by our past, by our identities, by the things that have made us the kind of people that we are. So I think for that reason, if we forget the past, we're condemned to keep repeating it. So for that, again, I would say that we need to give people an opportunity not to have an unquestioning look at the past, but rather to have the skills and capacity as citizens of Europe today to look back and say, yes, that's where we went wrong, or perhaps maybe we should look at this again. There was something in it, maybe not everything, but there was something there. And that perhaps also we should think that sometimes a great deal of what we are is shaped by the spirit of those who went before us. And that I think is certainly true in Ireland, that our history, particularly we were a colonized country, we were a country with famine, we were a country with poverty, and we're a country, as I told people today, who had to migrate. Millions of people left Ireland, and they had to find homes elsewhere. So we've had to learn to understand what it is to lose family, to understand what it is to be poor, and now that we are wealthier, we have to understand how to manage wealth. So I would belong to the camp that thinks we should always, I think in terms of our citizens, think that one of the great things we can do for a citizen of the country is give them the skills and capacity to look at their past.
You mentioned identity.
Yes.
And so the soul searching of Europe is also part of searching the European identity. At the same time, we have our national identities.
Yes.
And at the same time, over the recent years, I have sort of heard, I would even use the word preaching about European identity without giving any content what it is. And this has been partly, I would say, bureaucratical, by my opinion. What do you think? How can it be combined? We have our own national identities, and how can we combine it? And where does this European identity rise from?
Okay. When I was asked to think about this question of identity and meaning in Europe, the first thing that I thought about was what shapes my identity and meaning as an individual. And immediately I thought about home, the place I come from. And that's down to the level of, the part of the west of Ireland where I grew up and the influence it had on me. Then there's the influence of my country. And then there are the connections, the tentacles that reach out from that. In our case, because we're such an open country, that reach across Europe, across the United States, even into Africa. So that the shaping of our identity is always around starting from where you come from. Your place is what's important, the things that you learn and that you learn to value there. But an important component of that is learning that we are not unique. Yes. That there are other ways of looking at the world, that there are other viewpoints, there are other cultures, language, there are different musics. For example, I like to read a lot. And one of the great things about reading is when you read in the language of another country, because no amount of translation is ever a substitute for the language of another country. So all of these things are part of what we are. And one of the things I think that makes Ireland, and perhaps Estonia in some way, something that we have in common is that obviously everybody speaks English in Ireland, but it's not the first language of the state. We have another language, not spoken by an awful lot of people, but one which brings to us a different way of looking at the world. Even the phrases and the things which are important in that language. So when we want to shape identity, I think we need to think about the things which we carry with us into that broader dimension. Now, when I look at Europe and you say to me, where is this going to go then? Because, what is it that shapes Europe? Well, I would say that we are very heavily shaped by the influence of the dominant cultures of the European mainland. And one element of that, but I stress one element, is the Christian heritage of Europe.
One more question. We are very enthusiastic here in Estonia about our language.
Yes.
How is the state of Irish language in Ireland and
The Irish language is a very minority language now. And it is the first official language of the state, and it is an official language as well of the European Union. So we see a value in it, but we've done things very badly, for example, in terms of the way we teach it. So that for long periods of time people learned Irish language at school, but left school not able to speak it. Now we're concentrating on speaking the language. Secondly, I think things which have helped where we established an Irish language radio and an Irish language television station. We didn't have either. And these have been very important in terms of building a new audience of people who understand this language as something that's living, not as something that they read in books. I'm fortunate because I'm from the west of Ireland, and that's the area where the Irish language is strongest. So, for example, my grandfather spoke it as his first language. But he had 9 children and not one of them spoke Irish. Because at that time, when they were born, the expectation was that they would all have to leave the country to make their living. We were so poor. And as it turned out, 8 of the 9, all except my father, went. Right? And therefore, it was more important that they knew English than that they knew Irish.